I don't linger long. Ghost Wash, New Mexico, 1888. A quiet rancher lifts a filthy blanket. A girl breathes, "I'm filthy," inside and out. The West holds its breath. No gore, just dust, decency, and a sheriff's green ledger giving chase. Stay saddled. By sundown even the hinge hushes, and a light gets a name. The dry season had the country by the throat. Heat lay heavy on the Rio Hondo, same as a blanket no one asked for. Wind dragged dust along the flats and shoved it uphill, where juniper threw spotted shade. The air tasted like coin and grit. A hawk hung still above a pale arroyo, waiting on a mistake. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Eli Kincaid rode easy, one hand low on the horn. Salt blocks, cartridges, and a sack of nails were lashed neat behind his saddle. He had bought little, talked less, and kept his eyes off other men's business. He wanted the same in return. Just a clean gait, sound wire, cattle that drank and didn't wander. Peace wasn't a word to him. It was a list he worked through. Lincoln fell behind the ridge. The trail bent toward Ghost Wash, where old rains had bitten the land and left white scars. The gelding's ears tipped forward as she moved. Eli felt it through leather. He gentled the bit and scanned the slope. Nothing moved but heat shimmer and a stubborn grasshopper. An old voice from his memory rode with him, the kind that spoke once and stuck. Round Hondo, justice doesn't holler, dust does the talking. He had learned to read that dust. It told him where a steer crawled through, where a prowler cut sign, where a man lied without opening his mouth. He kept his horse to the hard edges and let the wash show its mind. The trail narrowed between piñon and rock. The gelding blew and planted. Eli felt the small set of it. No panic, just question. He swung a leg, dropped to the ground, and took the reins short. The shade under the piñon smelled of sap and old rain that never quite came. There was a bundle there, cloth the color of road dust, bunched wrong, heavy at one end. It lay half in shade, half in sun, as if it couldn't decide. Coyotes would have worried it if they'd found it first. They hadn't. He stopped 3 paces off and let his eyes work before his boots did. No buzz of flies, no carrion smell. A corner of the blanket lifted when the breeze slid under. Eli saw a shape that wasn't rock. A heel? Maybe. He didn't move. He listened until the country itself went quiet again. The hawk clicked once and sailed farther down the wash. He set the reins over his arm and crouched slow. His knees talked a little. Dust sifted from the piñon needles and settled on his hat brim. He reached with 2 fingers and turned a fold of cloth. Not much, just enough. Sun-found skin the color of old cream, streaked with trail dirt. The wrist was narrow, lined in dust where a cord had ridden too long. Eli let the cloth fall back. He didn't swear, he didn't call out. Trouble had a way of growing if you gave it noise. He looked downslope for sign, boot tracks new enough to hold an edge, mule scuffs, anything. The wash showed only wind and the faint, wide brush of something dragged. The gelding stamped, then stood ashamed of it. Eli rose and weighed the light. Another hour and the ridge would throw shade across the whole bend. Coyotes liked that hour. Men who meant harm liked it more. He eased closer, measuring the bundle as if it were a skittish calf that might bolt at a breath. The cloth was stiff where sweat had dried and turned to salt. He saw a snag of hair caught on a burr, the short kind that breaks when a body sleeps rough. There was no sound yet, none he could name. Maybe breath, maybe wishful thinking. He set his palm on the ground and felt for tremble through the grit. Something there answered him, faint as a moth's wing, against a window. He breathed once, slow, and let the heat wash past him. "All right," he said, more to the country than to the bundle. "We'll read this gentle." He slid his coat off one shoulder and folded it in his hands. The sun pushed on his neck. The wash held its tongue. He leaned in and, with the care he used on a tangle of new wire, lifted the edge of the blanket again. A wrist, narrow and dust-lined, lay open to the light. The wrist twitched once under the light. A bird's flutter, and done. Eli lifted the blanket a handspan more. A cheek lay there, sun-browned but gone sallow under trail dust. Lips split from thirst, hair clumped with grit and sap, snagged on a burr like fence wool. No flies yet, no stink of the bad kind, just heat and the faintest thread of breath. Her eyes opened the way a door unlatches in a wind. Slow, not sure it should. They didn't jump or plead. They just looked past him as if the juniper shadows were counting time. When she spoke, it sounded like gravel rolled in a dry pan. "I'm filthy, inside and out." The words didn't ask for anything. They laid down a line and waited to see who stepped over it. Eli didn't. He eased his coat from his arm and folded it once, twice. He slid it under her shoulders the way you slide burlap under a stuck calf. No grab, no fuss, all care. The blanket shifted. She was light in the wrong way, the way a man hates to feel. "Easy now, ma'am," he said. "The door's yours." He never did like questions when a body couldn't hold them. He checked the slope with a quick cut of his eyes. No new sign, no shadow that didn't belong. He set his boots and lifted. Her hand found the front of his shirt, more reflex than trust, and stayed. He felt the tremble move through her, into him, a light tapping against bone. The gelding stood honest. Eli settled her forward of the cantle, then stepped up and drew her in where his arm could keep her. He set the blanket right, tucked the fringe away from the wind. The coat kept her off the raw leather. He snugged the cinch a hole, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something plain to do. He spoke, once more, low so it fit the quiet country. "You're safe for this stretch." She didn't answer. Her head drifted where the hollow of his shoulder offered a place to rest. He felt the soft catch of her breath on his shirt. A damp the sun would dry before the next mile. On, the juniper gave a little resin back as the horse turned. The wash opened its pale mouth to the south. Eli put his heels to the gelding, as gentle as if he were riding through catclaw. He kept to the hard line of the bank, where sign didn't print so easy. A hawk swung wide and let them pass below, bored with men's errands. Far off, the ridge bristled and softened again as heat played tricks. He set their pace to a steady lope, the kind that eats miles without letting thought run ahead. He didn't look down to check her face. He watched the trail and the sky and the thin wind that rattled last year's grass. He counted fence posts in his head, the ones he still meant to set because work steadies a man when prayer might get in the way. He let the country talk. How the dust lay, how the light moved, how trouble sometimes left a tail like a comet. No one else noticed. Behind them, the piñon kept its shade. Ahead, the mesa lifted like a book laid half open. The Rio Hondo made no sound, a trickle under stone. He could feel his place out there, the way a hand feels its own pocket. Juniper Mesa Ranch was a square of boards held together by wire, nails, and habit. It was enough. She shifted once, testing the hold of the world. His arm tightened without thinking. The blanket rasped his knuckles. Her breath steadied to something almost even. The words she'd said rode with them, not heavy, just present. He didn't argue them. He didn't try to wash them with talk. Out here, you cleaned what you could reach. The sun slid a finger along the ridge and turned the sky behind to old coin. Shadows pulled long off the sage, and the heat backed down one stubborn step. Eli rode for the gate he knew by heart, for the hinge that squealed and would need grease before night, for water he could warm and a comb he kept in a tin by the lamp. No law trailed them on the open, not yet. No neighbor stood to stare. The land kept their secret like it kept most things, quiet, steady, and willing to forget if a man treated it right. He put the gelding at a climb where the footing stayed solid and let the trail show its mind. Almost there, he said, not for her to answer, but so the wind could carry something kinder than dust. Shadows fell across the door he meant to make hers. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Shadows lay thin across the yard when Eli swung down. The gelding nosed the trough and drank like a man pays debt. Eli lifted the girl easy, kept the blanket tight, and shouldered the door with his boot. The hinge answered with a long, rusty squeal that made the rafters shiver. Dust blinked on the window glass. The room smelled of iron stove, dry wood, and old soap. He set her on the narrow cot near the firebox. The blanket slumped, but her hands kept a corner, more habit than need. He struck a match, touched the lamp, then fed the stove with pine and a slab of juniper. Flame came fast, blue at the base, steady once the draft found its pull. He hung the kettle, then chipped willow bark into a tin cup the way Alma once showed for fever and ache. He worked quiet, boots soft on plank, tin soft on iron. He set a wooden comb by the lamp and a folded towel with a clean space on it. He ladled bean stew from the pot he kept ready for his own suppers, thick, brown, honest food, and split a wedge of cornbread so the crust wouldn't scrape a sore mouth. He kept his eyes on the tasks, not on her, because respect is a kind of fence, and a man minds his posts. Eat, if you can, he said. No hurry. She watched the steam as if it held a story she almost remembered. Her lips tried the spoon and managed a shallow drink. He put the willow cup near the lamp where the heat would not bully it. The hinge creaked again when the draft shifted. He made a note in his head, oil, then patience. Some things quiet if you tend them regular. A small scuff touched the porch. Eli turned his head and saw Kid Rowe in the window, a skinny shadow with a hat too big. Kid didn't knock. He carried a fiber-wrapped bundle and the kind of grin a boy wears when he's trusted with something that counts. Eli stepped outside and pulled the door to, letting it rest but not latch. The evening cooled his shirt. Kid held up the bundle. "From Miss Alma," he said, breath quick. "Peppermints and, well, this old shawl. She said you'd know why." "Much obliged," Eli said. Kid glanced at the door, then at the yard like he was reading it for hoof prints. "Miss Alma told me once you could read dust," he said. "Said not to speak names, neither." Eli nodded. That was Alma. She had taught half the kids in Rio Hondo to hold a hymn book straight and count without fingers. She had taught one girl more than letters. He remembered the girl's face, small and brave at a church bench years back. He didn't say the name. He took the bundle. Kid ducked his head. "I'll set a couple stones on the north trail," he said. "No reason." "No reason," Eli said. "Ride home slow." Kid slid off the porch like a lizard and vanished into the thin dark. The yard settled. A nighthawk stitched the air above the tank, sewing dusk to night with a stitch you could hear if you held still. Eli stood there a breath and let the quiet clear his hands. He went back inside and lay nameless, the shawl folded near the cot where a woman's aunt could see it without being asked. He set the peppermints in a tin by the lamp, one red stripe bright against the plain room. He moved the stew closer and nudged the cup so the willow wouldn't scald. "I'll sit the porch," he said. "Holler if you need." She didn't answer. Her eyes had the far look of cattle that finally find shade. He backed out and let the door rest against its own weight. The hinge squealed a protest, thin as a child's sigh. He took the top step and sat where he could see the yard, the gate, and the streak of trail that slid down from the rim. He unrolled a bit of latigo and rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, working the grease in because hands ought to stay busy when hearts don't know what to do. The kettle whispered. Coyotes talked faint across the wash. He tasted a peppermint and felt the sting of it wake his mouth. An old voice rose up, one of those ground truth sayings Alma liked to lay down at the counter. "Juniper keeps the shape of a good man's boot," it said, into in his head. "Don't let it keep a girl's crying." He looked at the fence line and pictured tomorrow's chores, stacked in order. Water, wood, oil the hinge, tighten wire, grind a measure of coffee for 2 cups. Work had a way of making a house breathe easier. He settled his back to the post and kept watch while the stove beat a slow heart behind him. Somewhere in there the country sighed and let them both belong for one small night. Dawn slid in pale as skim milk. The stove had gone to a red hush, and the yard held that first chill a man respects. Eli poured a dipper from the bucket and splashed his face at the bench. Coffee hissed in the pot and steadied the room with its old, dark promise. The hinge let out a thin squeal when the draft shifted, like it remembered something it didn't want to. He looked to the cot, blanket there, shawl folded neat, no girl. He eased them with 2 fingers and stepped into the yard. The gelding switched his tail, a nighthawk cut the last thread of night and was gone. The barn stood with its gap-toothed boards taking the light slow. She sat inside on a sack of feed like it was the last soft thing left in the world. Arms wrapped around it, chin resting where the burlap made a pillow. The dust on her cheek had turned to a pale map. She watched him without shrinking, the way a deer watches wind. He set the tin plate by her knee, stew warmed back up, cornbread split. He set down the wooden comb beside it and a cup with willow bark steeped till it went the right tan. He didn't crowd the space. Barn air smelled of cut hay and animal sleep, cleaner than the trail and kinder than the road. "Eat if it sits easy," he said. No call to finish it. She tried the cornbread first, held it to the light as if remembering what bread is. Then the stew. Small spoons, slow, the willow cup last, a careful sip. She set the comb in her lap, and I stared at it like a stranger that might turn friend. Her voice came low, like gravel rolled in a pan. "Why didn't you touch me?" Eli let the quiet stand so the words could breathe. He answered the way you set a post. Straight, no wobble. Because nobody should have. Her mouth worked once, and the breath she'd been holding let go. No tears, just a small loosening around the eyes, like a rope slackening a notch. He tipped his hat back. "Got a hinge on that front door, been sass-talking me," he said. "I'll see to it now." He fetched the oil tin and a thumb of old tallow, a nail set, a rag clean enough to count. On Juniper, a man fixed what squeaked before it learned to holler. He lifted the door, worked the pin up a hair, wiped grit, smeared the tallow where metal bit wood, then trickled a sting of oil. He set the pin back and rocked the door through its swing. The sound walked down from a squeal to a whisper, then to nothing worth a mention. "Better," he said to the house, and the house believed him. She reached for the comb and tried to draw through her hair. The first pull found a burr and stopped. He turned his eyes to the yard and listened to the birds argue fence rights. After a time, the teeth of the comb started making their patient way. He sat on the sill so he could be near without being in. The barn board striped the light across her and the feed sack both, like the world was measuring them for new clothes. When she spoke again, the words came as if a door somewhere had eased off its latch. "There's a hill place," she said. "Looks down on Hondo. Folks call it Sage Ridge House." He didn't move. The name counted all by itself. "A room with a slide window," she went on. "A locked door, a ledger wrapped in green cloth with red thread through it." Her fingers touched the comb's spine. "I saw what I wasn't meant to see." Eli let the truth sit where she put it. Wind raked the juniper and left the air smelling sharp. Somewhere a cow bawled for her calf and got an answer. He breathed once, slow. "All right," he said. That's a lot for one mouth to carry. You ain't got to haul it today." The hinge gave him his answer, quiet now, regular as a heart at rest. The barn seemed to stand easier under its own weight. She finished the stew, set the spoon like it might break if she dropped it, then drew the comb again. Hair came away less in clumps, more in lines. He poured coffee into a second cup and watered it, set it where the steam wouldn't bite. "You can take the cot by the stove," he said, "or the barn if boards feel safer than walls. Either way, the door's on your latch." She looked past him at the little house, at the door that swung without complaint. The corners of her mouth remembered how to try the shape of a yes. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the rope had slackened another notch. An old hondo saying walked through Eli's head, the kind Alma liked to pin to a paper sack. "You fix the squeak you can reach, the rest quits trying." He rose, wiped his hands on the rag, and hooked the oil tin back where it lived. "Coffee's on," he said. "Then I'll see to the north wire." She nodded and went on with the comb, stroke by careful stroke, while the barn took in the morning and held it like a thing worth keeping. Outside, the country made room for one more day. Inside, a hinge and a breath had both learned to go quiet. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. By mid-morning, the hinge stayed quiet as a well-broke horse. The house breathed easier. Eli saddled with the steadiness he saved for hard errands. "Medicine, nails, coffee," he said. "Back before the heat bites." Ruthie wrapped Alma's shawl close and tucked the wooden comb inside it like a promise she meant to keep. She swung up behind him without fuss, light and sure where yesterday had been shake and drift. They took the wash down slow, then shouldered into the open where the road to Lincoln ran like a pale scar. Town met them with Board Creek and the thin clink of a spittoon ring. Dust lay on the porch rail same as always, but eyes polished footprints in it. Eli tied off and let the gelding think kind thoughts at the trough. He guided Ruthie inside Brewster's, where shelves smelled of coffee and lye and lamp oil. Alma stood behind the counter, her hair pinned back plain, her look as steady as fence wire in new posts. A flicker crossed her face when she saw the shawl. Recognition kept gentle. She didn't say a name. She set down a jar, reached under the counter, and lifted 3 things without writing them on any paper. A small tin of salve, a twist of willow, a sack of nails. "Coffee's dear this month," she said to the room at large, as if counting beans to herself. "But a man that keeps his hinges oiled should have a cup." Eli nodded once. "Much obliged." Ruthie kept to the side where the shadow fell off the flour barrels. Her eyes held the door the way a doe holds a trail. Alma slid a strip of peppermint across the wood, with 2 fingers casual as a bookmark. They were almost to the light when the porch boards took a hard step. Vance Pritchard filled the doorway like a plug jammed in a drain. Cheeks red from cheap whiskey, smile that never made friends. The room seemed to lose a degree of shade. "Well, now, he said, looking past Eli to the shawl. "Cat drags all kinds of things back to town." Eli set the sack of nails down so the weight wouldn't swing. He didn't shift his boots. "She ran for payday," Vance went on, voice cheerful as a rattler. "We had us a deal." Ruthie's fingers found the comb under the shawl and stilled there. Alma's hand paused over the scale, then moved again, like nothing had snagged it. Eli stepped once, not much, enough to change the air between men. "She ain't yours." The words were flat and final, the kind that fit anywhere. Vance grinned wider as if he'd been waiting to hear them. "Old man, you don't know the shape of this county," he said. "My brother wears the badge. He writes who belongs where. That hill place, Sage Ridge House, belongs to the badge." He leaned in, breath sour. There's a green ledger sits in a locked room up there. Pretty little thing saw pages best left shut. Names, splits, county whacks. She read what ain't hers to read. That book comes back, so does she. Eli didn't answer the brag. Talk gives rot more air. He put one short fist where Vance kept his smile. It wasn't a showy punch. It didn't need to be. Vance stumbled back into the light, boots scraping board, hat dragging the jam, a wet, bright line starting at his lip. He laughed like he'd tripped on his own porch. Nobody reached for him. Nobody reached for Eli. Town is a place where men let other men choose the trouble they want. Vance thumbed his mouth and looked at the red on his skin like it was news. He seemed pleased to have something to show his brother. You just signed a page you can't erase, he said. Hondo keeps a ledger. You two are on the page. Out by the forge, Cyrus Talbot lifted his hammer and let it fall once, the ring of it clean as a church bell. Not a word, just iron saying it remembered winter and a man's hand on river ice. Alma moved the sack of coffee across the counter with a palm that didn't shake. You forgot your change, she said to Eli, though no coins passed. Between the bills lay a scrap of penciled map, a line to Dry Fork that looked like a woman's trail. Eli gathered what the day offered. Medicine, nails, coffee, a line on a safer bend, and turned his shoulder to the door. Ruthie went with him, shawl close, chin level. The street held its breath and let them pass. Vance laughed again, a sound that didn't travel far. On the porch, the sun hit them hard enough to bake thought. Eli didn't look back. He settled the sacks on the horn and gave the gelding his head. Behind them, the store bell tapped once, like a spoon set careful on a saucer. Ahead, the road ran pale and mean toward home. He felt the weight of the words Vance had thrown and didn't argue them. Out here, a ledger could be paper or dust. Either way, a man answered it by what he did next. He set their pace to steady and let the country decide who it meant to keep. They rode home slow and said nothing worth the wind. The house took them back the way a good dog does. No questions, just room. The hinge held its peace. Eli set the coffee on the shelf and didn't bother with a fire. He moved in the plain order of a man who means to travel in the dark. Jerky, cartridges, water, 2 bedrolls, he said, and laid each thing where the lamp would have sat if there'd been a lamp. He wrapped the salve and willow Alma had slipped him, folded the penciled map tight as a scripture, and tucked it inside his vest. Ruthie fetched canteens without being asked, felt their weight with both hands, and set them by the door that no longer squealed. They worked the way tired folk pray, quiet, steady, each task a bead on a string. Eli cut strips of latigo, checked cinches, waxed a seam on his old canteen, then set his wooden comb back by the lamp for her to find again and not lose. Ruthie rolled blankets, square and true, and took time to tie them twice. The shawl went across her shoulders like a thought she meant to keep. Dusk leaned its elbow on the yard. Eli stepped to the north post and squatted where a flat rock showed a fresh scrape. He pried it up with 2 fingers. Underneath sat a bundle wrapped in oily cloth, the kind that keeps rain off a good tool. A farrier's mark was scratched in the grit. Cyrus Talbot's old brand, a horseshoe with a nick in the heel. Inside, nails, latigo straps, a plug of hinge grease in a snuff tin, and nothing written. Eli's hand remembered a winter's day, Hondo ice hollow as a drum, Cyrus's arm dead numb, Eli on her belly sliding a rope across. Like a prayer you don't say out loud, he'd pulled the man back from the cold that keeps what it takes. A month later, folks whispered that Cyrus's niece had walked up near Sage Ridge House and vanished into the wind that comes off money. Eli set the rock back how he found it. He didn't call thanks to the yard. He tied the straps to his saddle and let that stand for talk. By the tank, a boy moved where boys move when they don't want to be seen. Kid Row stacked 3 small cairns along the fence shadow, one at the cottonwood, one by the split rail, one where the trail splits its mind. They were nothing to a man who didn't know. To Eli they said dry fork twice and keep east of the cut once. Kid tipped his hat brim and never spoke. "Tell Alma the coffee'll taste right when it can," Eli said. Kid's grin flashed and was gone. He stepped off into the brush like a quail. Eli led the gelding to the shade and let him drink slow. He filled Ruthie's gourd and wrapped it with a strip of wet rawhide so the night would give it a small cool. He set a pinch of peppermint on the sill, like a mark you leave for luck when you're not the luck kind. "We don't light this place," he said. "We don't lock it." "Neither." Ruthie looked at the quiet hinge and put her palm to the door as if blessing a thing that had learned better manners. "It'll remember us," she said, and the words didn't tremble. They ate cold stew from the pot with their hats on. Heat left the boards in slow skins, and the first coyotes spoke polite across the wash. Eli saddled with more care than a parade horse. He tied the map where his ribs would remember it. He checked the cartridges by touch and counted the way. A man counts fence posts, slow so the number holds. Dark pooled under the juniper. A line of sky lifted a last pale seen and miles in the west. Somewhere up on the rim the wind began to flip pages. A man couldn't read from the yard. Eli swung up and reached a hand down. Ruthie took it and found the horn without hunting. He left the door on the latch. He didn't look back to see if the house looked small. A man keeps the size of a place inside him and carries it whole. They slid into the wash and let the gelding pick the hard. The cairns showed soft as cat eyes when the stars came. East of the cut, then south a finger, then the shallow bank where women had walked dry fork with their skirts bunched and their babies high in flood time. Alma's line on paper proved true in dust. "Hondo keeps books in dust," Eli said to the night. "We won't let it write our names tonight." Ruthie breathed a yes that didn't need saying twice. The horses' footfalls found the silent count. Juniper traded resin with the dark. The country opened its throat and took them in, and the house behind them held their places the way good boards do, without fuss, without fire, with a hinge that remembered how to be quiet. Night thinned to iron gray. They kept east of the cut until the cairns ran out, and the land started talking in a tighter voice. The gelding's ears worked like 2 metronomes, catching sounds Eli couldn't yet see. He shifted the horse's gait. Long walk, then a lope, then back again. So any man reading sign behind them would have to think twice about what he knew. At first light, the ground showed its truth. A set of tracks cut in from the north, too straight for freighters, too neat for strays. Same shoe on both front feet, nails bright where rock had polished them. A careful rider, maybe 2. Eli knelt and touched the edge. The crumble hadn't gone flat yet. Close. "Smoke," Ruthie said, quiet. It was there if you looked wrong at it, a thin line unraveling just above the far ridge, not enough to warm a skillet, just enough to mark a camp that didn't mean to be seen. Eli studied the ash under their own boots. A pinch, swept with a juniper switch, and felt respect grudgingly. Men who knew the bush did that, and men who worked under a badge. He angled them into a ravine, let the walls steal wind, and took to stone where sign doesn't brag. Ruthie slid down when he did, and showed him a trick that wasn't from books. She broke a fresh juniper branch, held it upside down, and brushed their own prints at the bottleneck, backing away on rock so the brush wrote the last word. When she straightened, needles flashed green, wet with sap. "At Sage Ridge," she said, eyes on her hands. "They patrol on the new moon." Eli looked up at the pale rind morning and answered without smile, "Then we walk against the moon." They moved like coyote and shadow, never straight when a sidestep would do. Where the ravine widened, Eli took 3 of Cyrus's farrier nails and flicked them into the sand of the far bank. Not enough to lame, enough to make a reader think the crossing had been there and not here. He left 2 more where a careless rider might see one and not the other. Midday went mean. Heat came off the rock in hard breaths. They found a length of fallen wire sagging from a gray cedar post and stopped, though every nerve said, keep going. Eli tied the gelding to shade and pulled the wire up gloved-handed. Quick mend, he said. Cows'll find this gap before we do again. He restrung a temp line, 2 staples, and a twist, the kind of fix a man makes when he means to come back and do it right. Ruthie wrapped the water gourd in damp rawhide again, laid it where a sliver of wind could love it. They took a bite of jerky that did more to remind a mouth it was a mouth than to feed it. Ruthie's eyes scanned the rim while she chewed, counting without numbers. When they moved on, she checked the tent flap hinge on the canvas roll, just a little brass eye and a leather tab, but it squeaked when she tried it, sharp as a tattler. Eli thumbed open Cyrus's grease tin, tapped 1 clean dot on the eye, and worked it through until the sound went from gossip to nothing at all. Afternoon laid a white hand across the mesa. Twice they saw old ash raked smooth, and once a cigarette butt pinched shut with a rider's glove, sign of men who had time to neaten things and the habit of it. Eli changed their line again, took them up a shale face where the horse had to think, then down into a crease that carried a whisper of seep. Ruthie gathered a juniper switch without being told, and walked backward 24 steps, brushing out prints, then stepped sideways onto a run of rock like she'd been born to the trick. The set of her mouth had changed since morning. Not hard, just decided. Toward evening the land did them a small kindness, a choke point where 2 shelves of stone leaned together and left a throat no wider than a wagon tongue. Sign would stack there like words in a narrow column. Eli stood under it and felt the stone's cool breath. Here, he said. He took a coil of rawhide from his saddlebag and ran it through a forked root, set a knot he trusted, and eased a snare into place low, where a galloping foot expects open air, not a trap to break a life, just enough to say slow down. They stepped back into brush dark and let the light bleed out of the day. Somewhere behind them the ridge kept its thin smoke. Somewhere ahead, the country waited to see if a man could mind his sign and his soul at the same time. Eli checked his rounds by touch and set the map where his ribs would know it. Ruthie laid the fresh switch across her knees and watched the throat of stone as if she could make time pass with looking. You'll sleep in pieces, Eli said. I've slept in worse shapes, she answered. And the words held. The wind came up full of juniper. It combed the ravine like fingers through hair and left things smoother than it found them. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. They waited through the blue drain of dusk until the throat of stone held its own breath. A pebble clicked somewhere far off, then another, closer, the way a man talks by accident with his boots. The gelding lifted an ear and settled. Ruthie lay flat behind brush, a fresh juniper switch across her forearms, like a little green cross. Eli's fingers rested on rawhide. The first rider came light and sure, standing a hair in the stirrups to float a trot. The second hung a length back, careful the way paid men are. The snare was a question stretched across air. The lead horse answered wrong. Rawhide bit, pucked, and the animal checked hard. The rider pitched forward, boot slid, body came down ugly but not final. The horse danced, then froze at a hand on the rein that knew horses. Eli was in the open before the dust finished its first thought. He cut the rope clean, stepped to the bridle, and spoke to the animal the way you speak to a scared child. Easy. The horse believed him. The rider didn't. He scrabbled to one knee, grabbed at the air, and found none. His foot lay at a bad angle inside his boot, not bleeding, just wrong. Ruthie was beside Eli without being told, her shawl dark against the rock. She kept her eyes on the other ridge where the second man might show. Nothing yet. Wind carried a dry laugh from some bird and then forgot it. Eli dragged the man into juniper shade, hid him from the throat, and set a knee gentle across his good thigh so foolishness wouldn't start. He cut the spur strap, slid the boot off, slow, and felt the joint with two unkind fingers. He didn't smile, he didn't apologize. He wrapped the ankle with a latigo strap, not to comfort, but to keep the day from stealing more than it had a right to. A snare ain't a verdict, an old Hondo saying went through him. It's a pause. He asked one thing, the way a man throws a rope once when he knows his range. Who sent you? The rider swallowed grit and pride, looked from Ruthie to the place where the snare had been, and measured his odds. He found none. The answer came out half-chewed. The green ledger goes back to Corbin. The girl read the names. Eli watched his eyes while his hands finished the wrap. No tremor there, no lie a man could touch. The fellow tried a laugh that wouldn't stand. You think this is about pretty? It's about county wax. About a room with a slide window and a safe that opens for men with keys. His breath hitched when Eli cinched the leather. Ledger comes home, so does what saw it. Eli took the spur, pitched it into the brush where it clinked like a useless coin and stood. You'll keep, he said, and sounded exactly like he meant a fence post. They eased back into the rocks. The second rider ghosted the rim at last, spotted the empty snare and chose caution over proof. He circled wide and slipped away. Good. Better one man hurt in pride than two men mean at their work. Dusk folded into night the way a blanket learns a shoulder. Eli and Ruthie moved by pieces, giving ground to buy time, not to surrender it. They put rock between themselves and the place where anger might grow legs. Down in a side cut they set the tent flap with the hinge that no longer tattled and let the horse breathe. Ruthie tied the reins to a root with a knot that would hold and not shout about it. They ate nothing, drank a finger each, and saved the rest. Eli counted rounds by touch and memory, not out of fear, out of housekeeping. He shifted their line twice, small adjustments that let a man live longer than his temper. Ruthie spoke once to the dark. He won't die. Not tonight, Eli said. Not by us. The night after, the canyon spoke gun, not the wild slam of panic, but testing shots, one here, one farther off, like a man tapping a wall for hollows. Powder smoke drifted, curious and thin. Stone sent each report back wrong, so nobody learned much. Eli kept them behind angles that made sense. He let the other side waste information. He felt the distance close the way a herder feels weather down in the joints. There's a point where running writes your name the very way you hoped to stay unknown. He weighed that point and found it near. Tomorrow, he said, almost to himself. We cut this short. Ruthie's hands worked the reins once, then went still. No shake, no drift. Tell me where you want me, she said. Where the rock gives you shade and the wind brings you sound first, he answered. And that was enough plan for both of them. The wind rose and smoothed the night with juniper. Somewhere a small animal trotted home with the day's luck in its mouth. Eli lay with his back to stone and his hat canted low, the map against his ribs like a prayer he didn't say out loud. He shut his eyes in pieces and opened them just the same. Ruthie slept in the middle of those pieces and woke between them, the way a person does when they've learned not to ask for whole hours. Near midnight, a coyote sang to nobody in particular. The echo made it sound like a choir. Eli let the tune run through him and out again. He pictured the door back home that didn't squeal now and the fence he'd restrung with a promise to finish it right. He pictured a page with names and red thread and a hill house where men mistook fear for law. He breathed slow. Morning would come with its gray arroyo light, whether a man invited it or not. When it did, they'd be where they meant to be, with what they could carry and what they wouldn't lay down. Gray seeped into the cut like water finding a crack. The arroyo held its breath. Stone cooled his back through the coat. Ruthie took her place where the wind slid first, eyes on the throat of rock. Juniper switch across her knees like a small green oath. The gelding stood hip-shot, reins looped to a root that had learned patience. A pebble ticked. Then another, not hurry, testing. Eli eased to the angle he'd picked. In the dark, where two shelves pinched the world to a doorway, you had to ask. He set his hat brim so dawn wouldn't print it for another man. The first rider ghosted in and checked where the snare had once been. He saw nothing he wanted, only the throat ahead, and the memory of boot leather and a bad night for his partner. He slid forward, careful. The second came slower yet, rifle already thinking about being useful. Eli waited until the lead horse showed a shoulder. He spoke to it soft. "Easy." The animal gave him the smallest turn of an ear, and that was all the country needed to choose sides. He stepped out where a man might if he trusted his own boots. The rifle on the second rider's knee twitched. Eli's shot hit rock a handspan from the man's stirrup and kicked grit into his pants. A warning, not a wound. "Don't," Eli said. One word, good enough. The lead rider went for iron anyway, the way habit does when brains are late. Ruthie's voice came sharp and flat from the shade. No. It cut cleaner than a bullet. The man's hand faltered one count. Eli had his gun on him without looking like it cost anything. "Step down," Eli said. "Left foot first." They knew men who meant a thorning thing when they heard it. The lead rider slid off and put both hands wide. The second eased back a length, then thought better of the math and stayed. "Your sheriff wants a green ledger," Eli said. "He can come and fetch it from whoever stole it, not from her." The lead rider's mouth twitched. "Corbin doesn't fetch. He sends." "He just sent two," Eli said. "He can keep what he's got left." Silence settled like dust finding home. Far up the rim, the wind flipped a page in the day. Eli stepped to the horse's head and worked the bit down so the animal could breathe easier. He didn't watch the men while he did it. He trusted the place he'd picked and the woman he'd taught to listen to wind. A shot came from the second rider, wild by an inch and a lifetime. Stone answered twice, angrier than men. Eli had his gun on the sound and took the fool out of the man's wrist with a crack that sent the rifle skittering down into the wash. The rider yelped because pride makes more noise than pain. "Enough," Eli said. The word felt like a gate dropping true. The arroyo agreed. Even the horse seemed to let go of something. Ruthie stood then, not quick, just sure, shawl dark as a promise. She walked to where Eli was and took her place a half step behind his shoulder like that was the space the world had made for her. The lead rider watched her come and understood a kind of math he didn't like. "You could have killed us," he said. "Could have," Eli answered. Didn't." He holstered slow. The men gathered what was left of their nerve, which wasn't much, and backed their horses out of the throat. Pride made them look over a shoulder once. Wisdom kept them from twice. When the wash held only their dust, Ruthie let the breath go that she'd been keeping like coin. Her hand found the back of Eli's coat for a second, and then thought better of staying there. "You did that for me?" she asked, voice small and steady both. Eli looked at the rock, the sky, the day breaking open where the rim takes sunlight first. He tipped his hat back so he could see her without shadow. "I live for you first," he said. The old line rose out of the land and laid itself down soft. "Rim's gone copper. Let's go home." They didn't point toward Lincoln. They turned where the light ran warm along the flank of the mesa, where a man could pick his work and let it pick him back. The run fell off their shoulders like a coat you don't need anymore. Somewhere behind, the ledger and its whacks and its loud men still itched. Somewhere ahead, a hinge waited to move without complaint. The country, which had watched them honest, made room for their tracks. The wind took what was left of the gun smoke and blew it where it couldn't argue. They took the long shoulder below the rim and let the horse pick a place where water remembered how to linger. A cottonwood put down one good shadow. An old sheep pen offered reuse boards, weathered to the color of dry bone. Eli walked the ground until his boots agreed. He set a hat on a rock to mark the corner and squared the world to it. Work came on like rain that finally decides. He dug for rock, found rock, and set it anyway. He trued a sill with a draw knife that had seen 3 counties. He drove Cyrus's nails true and slow. 2 taps to find, 1 to set, 1 to bless. Ruthie cut brush, then dug post holes. The shovel rang off caliche and told on her arms, but the line held straight. She stacked stones under the stove to be and laid kindling like a letter she meant a careful reader to find. By noon, a one-room shack stood. No paint, no porch, but plumb enough to tell the wind it had manners here. Eli hung a door he shaved out of boards that didn't want to be neighbors, and made them be. He set a new hinge and rubbed it with the last, best of the grease, then eased the swing through until it went from complaint to quiet. On the stove, a stew began to think about itself. Beans, onion, a heel of cornbread broken in. The kind of smell that makes a day stop kicking. Ruthie strung a wash line, wrung a rag, and wiped dust off a pane until the country came through it honest. She set the wooden comb on a shelf like a small altar to plain things, then tucked Alma's peppermints in a tin for later. Toward evening, the country sent company the way it does when doors line up right. Alma Brewster came first, buggy light on the ruts, hat tied in a practical knot. She carried a jar of milk and a roll of red thread. She placed both on the sill, looked at Ruthie with the soft memory of a pew and a slate. "For stitching life back up," she said, like a woman discusses weather. "I recall your letters, child." Ruthie's mouth found a mutt shape that was nearly a smile and wasn't afraid of being one. An hour later, Cyrus Talbot rode in with a toolbox that had more scratches than a saloon table. He set his palm to the door, listened to the hinge breathe, and nodded. "If the hinge quits fussing, the house'll rest," he said. He squared a hinge pin with a farrier's patience, then tightened a strap that didn't need it, because some debts are paid in work till the hand remembers. He looked at Eli once, a winter of Hondo ice in the glance. "I still owe you 1 Hondo life," he said, and left it there. Near dusk, Kid Rowe drifted out of the brush with 2 books tied up in twine, a hymn book and a battered primer. Between the pages, he'd tucked a juniper sprig that made the words smell like the hill after rain. He set them on the table and scuffed a boot. "In case a person wants to read where the wind can hear," he said, and fled the way boys do when they've done a good thing too loud. Eli carved a thin plank and burned letters with a wire he heated on the stove. The point smoked and left dark truth behind, juniper light. He hung it right of the door where a man's eye would catch it on the way in, and remember he meant to be decent under it. The sign took the last light of the day and hid it like a coin for morning. They ate with hats off and elbows easy. No speeches. The stew did its own talking, and the stove sang low like a mother who knows the verses by heart. Outside, the line dried a pair of socks that had seen too much road and still came along. Ruthie stood in the door and watched the hinge not squeal. The country folded itself around the shack without argument. She touched the frame the way you touch a name cut into bark. When she spoke, it was to the space she'd chosen and the person who had chosen it with her. "That girl under the piñon, she's gone." Eli set his palm to the jamb, felt the hum of the day settling into wood. Good, let her rest. An old-timer truth moved through the yard and found a place to sit. Juniper, don't forget a decent boot track. It keeps it like shade. The Honda wind took a breath, then another, and turned a fresh page up along the rim. The Juniper light sign caught a small flame of sunset and held it quiet. The door swung once more for the pleasure of it and said nothing at all. That's where we'll leave 'em tonight. A door that doesn't squeal, a stove singing low, and juniper light catching the last stripe of sun. Out here, healing isn't loud. It sounds like wire pulled true, stew on a slow flame, and a good man keeping his word. If this one sat right with you, drop a 1 in the dust. If you just tip your hat and ride on, drop a 0. Either way, I'm listening. Trail rules are written in small marks. Saddle back with us for the next ride. More dust and decency. More quiet courage than noise. Subscribe and keep your boots by the door. When the wind turns, we'll have another story. Waiting at the fire. Much obliged.